Welcome to the Bite Size Interviews. I'm Rebecca Bradley and today I've got Quentin Bates. Quentin escaped English suburbia as a teenager, jumping at the chance of a gap year working in Iceland. For a variety of reasons, the gap year stretched to become a gap decade, during which he went native in the north of Iceland, acquiring a new language, a new profession and a family before returning to England. He worked as a truck driver, teacher, net maker and trawlerman at various times before falling into journalism, largely by accident. He's been a technical editor of an obscure nautical magazine for many years, all the while keeping a close eye on his second home in Iceland before taking a sidestep into writing fiction. Frozen Out, Cold Comfort, Chilled to the Bone, Winterlude, Cold Steel and Summer Chill, a series of crime fiction novels and novellas set in present-day Iceland, have been published in the UK, the USA, Germany, Holland and Finland, with the next in the series, Thin Ice, during 2016. He's also translated a great deal of news and technical material into English from Icelandic, as well as one novel, which I'm going to apologise for my translation or my lack of being able to say his first name, Gudlaugur Arason's Bowline. And he's also translated recently Ragnar Jonasson's Snowblind, which is currently being talked about and on the blogs and social media a lot. And is translating Ragnar's Nightblind novel as well. So, welcome to Bite Size Interviews, Quentin.
Thank you.
You write about Icelandic crime fiction, which is and has been having a massive surge in the UK for some time. What prompted you to use Iceland for a setting?
I couldn't not use it really because I'd lived there for so long and knew the place so well that when it came to writing fiction to start with, I shied away from it to start with. When I was working on the very first outlines I had for a crime novel, I avoided Iceland, but then I came to realise that I couldn't not use all this sort of knowledge and insight that I had about the place. It's a strange place, and there's all kinds of things going on under the surface that you don't notice as an outsider. I'm an insider and an outsider, if you like, because I'm not a local, but I can almost pass for a stray Faroese. But I can read the papers and I can talk to people and I can listen to what's going on the radio, so I pick up all the undercurrents that an outsider wouldn't normally pick up.
What do you see as the big draw of this kind of crime fiction for crime fans?
It's difficult to say, because Nordic crime fiction as a whole is a very broad church. It ranges from extraordinarily cosy to extraordinarily brutal, with every shade in between. Icelandic crime fiction is a little bit to one side in some ways. It hasn't had the attention that Swedish and Norwegian crime fiction has had. In fact, you could say that most of what people see as Nordic crime fiction is Swedish and Norwegian. And the Icelanders, Finns and the Danes are almost lagging behind. There's relatively few Icelanders in translation. There's only 5, including my translatee, if you like, which is very new. It's difficult to say what the attraction is. I think it all started with Sjöfell and Marflug all those years ago, and then Volander and Stieg Larsson came along, and I think it's just the quality of the stories as much as anything else.
What I did read recently was that Iceland only has approximately 1.5 murders a year, so which is really, really low. What makes it the perfect setting for fiction, but the perfect place for a peaceful life?
Well, Iceland's about the size of Croydon, with a population about the size of Croydon, and I don't know how many murders Croydon has every year.
Probably higher than 1.5.
You think so? Yeah, probably. Iceland is a pretty peaceful place. There are, and I think one year it went up to 3, and some years there are none. So they're not a particularly violent people, to say the least. Which is strange because there are guns everywhere. There are a huge number of firearms in Iceland, but they never seem to get used for shooting people. Only for well, geese and ptarmigan, basically. And it's a perfect place for a peaceful life because there are very few people, big distances between places, and it's very quiet. It's a great setting for crime fiction because you have that juxtaposition as well, which is maybe one of the attractions of Scandinavian crime fiction overall, is that you have this very peaceful, organised, very quite a middle class backdrop to brutal misdoings.
You've spent a lot of time living in Iceland. Do you have difficulties adjusting between your life here and there when you move between the two, because they are very different with what you've described Iceland as being?
It was difficult to move back here, although that was quite a long time ago now. I've been in England for more than 20 years. And there was a definite culture shock returning to Britain. And in some ways there still is. I think once you've lived abroad for a decent chunk of time, you find yourself being an outsider everywhere, where you look at places with an outsider's viewpoint. I don't feel particularly British, although I obviously am, but I don't feel Icelandic either. Difficult to put it into words. You do have a slightly skewed viewpoint in some ways. Iceland is, it is an odd place, and I do move seamlessly between the two now. I can just go from one to the other and pick up where I was. And partly the internet's due to that. It is one of the reasons for that, because we're so much closer to the place now than we were before. Because when I lived in Iceland to start with, there were no emails, there was no internet, there were no faxes. So all your information came through the TV or newspapers, and newspapers could be few and far between if the airport was closed for a week. But now you're totally in touch all the time. Now I can listen to Icelandic radio, I can watch the TV, I can read the Icelandic newspapers every day, which certainly wasn't possible a few years ago.
What do you love most about the Icelandic culture?
It's not the food.
Oh dear.
I think it's the people. It's the friends and relatives I have there, as much as anything else, as much as the culture itself. It's difficult to put into words. It's the feeling you get when you step off the plane and you've driven through Reykjavik and out the other side, and you go through the tunnel, and suddenly you're in a different world where everything's a little bit slower and a little bit more relaxed, and everybody takes the time more than they would normally. The rush and the stress seems to disappear. It's the peacefulness of it, I suppose.
It sounds idyllic, actually, and it's high on my list of places that I want to visit. Iceland.
It is idyllic until it starts to snow,
and then it's cold.
Then it gets to be a struggle getting from A to B.
Yeah. You did mention technology earlier in the interview. You started with fax and then how it had moved on, so information gets from the UK to Iceland. I don't know how social media savvy you are. Do you follow the Icelandic police on Instagram, because they are brilliantly fun to watch?
I don't watch them on Instagram, no.
They are brilliant.
I haven't graduated to Instagram yet, or Pinterest. I follow them on Facebook, and they are fun to watch.
I think it just shows how little crime there is in Iceland, because they look like they're having too much fun.
It may well be a fairly heavily edited version of what they do that you see on there.
Yeah, but it's great to see.
Yeah, it is worth seeing. Yeah, there really are coppers who walk around with ice creams in their hands and a couple of kittens on the street.
Yeah.
But they do have a tough side as well.
Yeah. How easy was it to learn the Icelandic language?
It took a long time. I still am learning, but it took me a couple of years before I could. No, it was a year and a half, 2 years before I could hold a reasonable conversation. Mostly, the difficulty partly is because they speak so fast. Everything rattles together into. It sounds like one long word. So that makes things very difficult to start with, and it took quite a few months to start with before I could distinguish one word from the next. What made it possible was that I was working, because you couldn't do this now. It would be very, very difficult to learn Icelandic in the way that I did today, because everybody speaks English. Back then, I was dropped into working in a factory with mostly older people, and their first language was Danish. They didn't speak English at all, so there was an awful lot of scribbled notes and diagrams and gestures and do this and do that, and some strange odd words and flicking through the dictionary. So there was really no choice but to get on with it.
Because, as we've said at the start of the interview, you have translated a couple of crime novels from Icelandic to British English.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
how difficult was that?
It was certainly a challenge. It wasn't a challenge with the language so much itself as whether I could actually interpret the Ragnar's words into English. So I've done a lot of trans-technical and news translation in the past, which is very precise. You don't have to worry too much about nuance of meaning or anything like that. It just has to be A to B, fairly straightforward. But literary translation turned out to be a whole different can of worms, especially when it comes to jokes and idioms, especially jokes. They're a nightmare. You have the choice of, you can translate the joke exactly as it is, and you have the exact meaning comes across, but it's no longer funny. Or you can almost dump the original joke and replace it with something that is amusing. So you're closer to what the author actually wanted, but you're departing from his words, if you like. And there are an awful lot of things like that in there, especially when you get to idioms and some swear words that all have to be transliterated rather than translated.
So did you work with Ragnar on the difficult parts like that, or did you have to make that decision yourself?
I did that myself.
Right.
And then he got to see it afterwards.
And what did he think?
It's a long story.
Is his English okay enough for him to read the English translation?
Yes, this is the problem. His English is outstandingly good. His English is superlative. But he's a lawyer, and his English is extremely precise and very good, but it's not idiomatic at all. And he would suggest changes, and he would put things into extremely flowery language that nobody would ever use, especially with, and you couldn't use that in dialogue. You had to sort of gently explain, no, we wouldn't. Nobody would actually say that. You might have read that in an Agatha Christie novel that was published in 1930, but we wouldn't use that in modern day English at all. But the editor played a big role in this as well, which was Karen Sullivan.
Yeah.
So it was very much a three-way process. And in places there were, Karen and I wanted something to be like that, and Ragnar didn't, so he would give way, and then maybe I would give way on something else that they both wanted to be done in a particular way. So it was very much a joint effort.
Yeah, it's something that I just started reading yesterday, and the protagonist has moved to this very isolated area, and what you were saying earlier about when you first went over there and how isolating it was because there was no internet and no fax or anything, you do get that very feeling from
That's right.
what is written.
In Siglufjord there is way up in the far north as well, where really can be cut off for days on end.
Mm.
Yeah. I've never been there, but I need to go there one day.
Yeah, but I think that's what I love about it is the cold and that kind of feeling, and I think that's for me what makes a good crime setting, because you are so cut off, and that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, it almost becomes a locked room mystery. Because it's such because you're in this microcosm of everything set in the village. Nothing happens from outside at all, so you have to solve it with whatever's on hand.
Yeah.
And almost any crime novel in Iceland is that way, because it's such a tiny place. Like I said, like the size of Croydon, you can't commit a big crime and get away with it. And there are no real bank robbers in Iceland, because what you do with money.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
leave the country.
Exactly. And then how do you get out? You'd have to steal your money in foreign currency and get it out.
Yeah.
If it was in local currency, you wouldn't be able to change it anywhere,
because they'd know.
Somebody would notice. If you managed to rob a bank and get away with a couple of zillion kroner, you'd have to stash them under your bed and spend them a little bit at a time. You wouldn't be able to pay off your mortgage, buy a car or anything like that, because matey down the road would notice. You say, where did you get that from? You can't afford that. You've got a job as cleaning.
Yeah.
So that adds an extra dimension to it almost.
Mm. Yeah, it really is. It really is something that is being enjoyed in the UK. I'm finding.
Yes, so. Snowblind really has taken off magnificently as well.
Yeah, and Icelandic crime fiction in general, I think that cold dimension just goes down really well.
I hope so.
Yeah, it does. So thanks for talking to me about it today anyway.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Quentin.
Thanks.